So with Northampton and Harlequins out of the Champions Cup at the semi-final stage, are English clubs destined to fall that little bit short, or are they actually having a bit of a resurgence? I'd love to know your thoughts on this because I've heard opinions both ways, but I would say that I think both sides were beaten by the better team on the day, and I actually see a bit of a trend in these teams. So let's make a bit of a crude measurement, which is very subjective, but I'm sure you'll see the pattern. Let's have a look at the established internationals in those matchday 23s. Now, you can definitely argue with some of those 50-50 calls, and please let me know, but I think it's a pretty clear trend. Let's have a look at Leinster first of all. 15 established internationals, I am saying in that 23. Yes, you can argue a couple either way, but it's still, let's have a look at Northampton, a lot more than Northampton. I'm saying about 4 established internationals in their 23. And yes, you could say there's going to be players that are going to come into the England team for Northampton and be great players for England in the future. Maybe, but not yet. And definitely in that game especially, Northampton made loads of mistakes in the opening 15-20 minutes, in fact for the whole game, and I think the occasion got to them a fair bit. Maybe it was the massive crowd, maybe it was the enormity of getting into a Champions Cup final up for grabs, I don't know, but I think both sides, Harlequins and Northampton, definitely suffered from more nerves compared to Toulouse and Leinster, particularly Northampton there. So 15 experienced internationals for Leinster and 4 for Northampton. That is a massive difference. And then I thought, let's do the same thing for Toulouse and Harlequins, and the pattern repeats. Toulouse, 14 established internationals, again, you can argue a few of those, and Harlequins about 5. So the pattern very similar, roughly 15 each for the 2 winners, and roughly 4 or 5 each for Harlequins and Northampton, the 2 losers. So it's not an excuse. There's no excuses in international rugby. No, it's 15 versus 15 when the whistle goes, but it's definitely an interesting pattern, and I think it definitely explains why Harlequins and Northampton really didn't perform in those opening 20 minutes, if you like. So let me know what you think about that one. Was it a big factor, or am I overplaying it? I think it's definitely something. And can the English clubs meet that 14 to 15 established internationals? That's something we're going to talk about now. Let's look at Saracens, the 2019 team first. I make it about 16 established internationals, so up and above Leinster and Toulouse, so they had loads of experience. Again, you can argue either way, some of those guys. And let's look at the 2020 Exeter side. Now, they do have slightly less big names, but they still had a big core of established England internationals with a couple of foreign internationals thrown in. I make it about 9 out of 23 for Exeter, so maybe that was a bigger achievement, I don't know. So is the model for Harlequins and Northampton to look for that kind of 9-10 out of 23 model that Exeter showed, bringing up young English talent, maybe having a couple of established internationals from abroad coming in as well? Well, yes, maybe, and Exeter got to that Champions Cup, but they couldn't keep those internationals. That is something that English clubs struggle with and will continue to struggle with, even if you bring through players from your system, invest in English players or players from close by, so the Welsh players we see coming into Exeter now. At some point, the wage demands will exceed the ability to pay them. And I think Exeter is the perfect case study, because some of those players that came through, they've gone now, like Sam Simmons, like Luke Cowan-Dickey, Jack Knoll. They've all gone away partly as their wages increased, and they've completely reset and started with some young English and Welsh players, trying to get them on contracts before they're big names. But some of these players are going to be massive names in the future. David Jenkins, say, if he carries on being a leader in the Welsh team, his wage demands are going to grow and grow, rightly so. And again, they may outgrow this young crop, but this is the way that English clubs seem to be going. And can they win something before those wages outgrow the ability to pay them? So with this point in mind, I think the Northampton and Harlequins, if we're looking at those two in particular, do have a chance to get to the kind of levels that Exeter did and maybe win something big, maybe win the Champions Cup. But it's a tough one. So let's have a look at money, because yes, money makes the world go round. And at the moment, there is a 5 million salary cap in the English Premiership. They do get top-ups as well, and when you put the homegrown player credits in there, the call-up top-ups, which is going to change, of course, with the central contracts coming in, it gets to about 6.4 million. Now, that wage cap will increase, and next season it's going up to 6.4, plus the top-ups gets to about 7.8. So it's definitely going up. Plus they can also pay one marquee player outside that cap now, if they have the funds to do that. Now, some clubs want to pay up to that new cap and play big bucks to one marquee player, but some clubs either don't want to or some clubs simply can't. And of course, the whole point of salary caps is sustainability. So even though 7.8 sounds pretty decent for next year, it doesn't really stack up to clubs in France and in Ireland. Have a look at the French system. That includes the top 14 and Pro D2. They have the same salary cap, which is really interesting because that Pro D2 league is absolutely thriving and it looks fairly sustainable. They have pretty big checks, as I understand it, on their financials before they can actually go ahead and join these leagues, and every year they have to resubmit them, as I believe. Let me know if there's something different there. But it's 9.2 million, excluding all players that have come through their academies. That is massive. So what a good incentive to develop their own players, and they've got a bigger salary cap as well. Now that's of course not budget. Budget would be all spending, including salary. And have a look at this graphic. I really like this one for the Pro D2 sides. And we can look there, some of those sides there are paying 14, 15, maybe even 16 million total budget, including salary, which is bigger than some of the English Premiership clubs. So that's the second division in France. And we're seeing big players going to these sides in Pro D2. Now, as far as I can work out for Leinster, and it is very tricky because there is no breakdown that I know of, let me know if there is. The URC has no salary cap. Well, it wouldn't really work anyway because they got clubs from lots of different countries, but they have no salary cap. And Leinster and the RFU share some of those salary costs, so it's very hard to know what the exact breakdown is. Plus, they have a huge academy. They've got lots of private schools as feeders. And again, this isn't excuses. They do a great job with it, but this is how it is. I do remember Bernard Jackman on a rugby pod a couple of years ago thinking that maybe they spent a couple of million more than the French teams, but I'm not so sure about that. He was guessing, but maybe around 10 million euros, something like that. If you've got a figure, please let me know. That's part of the reason I do these videos, to learn off you guys. But it's equivalent to those big French clubs. But what we do know is that Leinster can afford to pay competitive salaries to a team that contains the bulk of the Ireland team. And of course, some of those guys are kept there by the fact they can only play for Ireland when they are actually playing club rugby in Ireland. They do make some exceptions. Johnny Sexton, of course, went to Racing 92 and still played, but generally none of them have jumped ship. So they've got a hefty salary bill, but it is worth noting that between the revenue streams of Leinster and the RFU, it does seem sustainable. So fair play to them. So we've got France and Ireland and Leinster here we're talking about really. So it does look in essence like France and Leinster in Ireland in particular can pay a lot more in salary and it be sustainable. So is that something these English clubs can compete with? Now the last argument I'm going to put in there to say that maybe the English clubs can win a Champions Cup in the future is the fact that unfortunately they've lost 3 of their number. We've got Worcester Go, London Irish and Wasps. Even though maybe in the future they might come back lower down in the system and come through. I don't know, there's always talk about that, but certainly for the near future it is just 10 clubs. And the argument is that's actually kind of helped the English system, helped concentrate the talent so they can actually get more out of their salary cap. And of course we've seen Finn Smith be integral to Northampton, and he of course came from Worcester. And we've seen Chandler Cunningham South, he's going to become a star for Harlequins and for England, and he came from London Irish. And there's plenty of other guys in the English Premiership that came from those 3 clubs. Ollie Lawrence, for example, came from Worcester to Bath, and he's absolutely tearing it up. So yeah, I think there is some merit in saying going down to 10 clubs will help. The raising of the salary cap will help. And also if those central contracts are introduced, which it looks like they are, that may help as well. And maybe all that together will mean that English clubs can win the Champions Cup once again. But only time will tell. But I do think sides like Northampton and Harlequins will get better and better as those young English players develop. Plus the other factors we've mentioned, maybe they could in the future. In the short term, I'm probably saying no, but I'd love to know what you think. So hopefully that was food for thought. You found some of those points interesting, some of those kind of pseudo stats quite interesting as well. If you like that sort of thing, please like, please subscribe. That always helps out. All those comments below as always, and I'll catch you next time.